Yes, please, Sigrun.
Today's keywords will be land use, biodiversity, ecosystems, and agriculture. A very warm welcome to our China lunch today.
Thank you, Sigrun. This was Sigrun Abes, and I'm Tanja Becker, and warm welcome to all of you, and especially to my Max and Guo Haixin students and participants of our course, China Climate Change as a Chance. The focus of our seminar are renewable energies, wind, water, and sun. The China Lunch event is a part of our seminar in which we deal with the consequences, but also with chances of the current climate change. We talk about the opportunities that can arise in the current climatic crisis, such as social cohesion or new inventions. So welcome to all of you.
Yeah, and the China Lunch is not only part, or the seminar is not only part of the China Lunches, but the China Lunches is a part of our Urbanics project. I think most of you know this already. Since 5 years, we are building up a network of China and German alumni in the field of urbanization and urban development. And in former times, I have to say 3 years ago, Miro maybe reminds this, and others, we met in a seminar room at TU Berlin. We had a lecture, we had a Q&A, and we had a lunch. And since the digital format of this event, we only have a virtual lunch, and we sent you a recipe. And I think the favorite dish of Mr. Cheng was mapo tofu, a vegetarian food meal, and a recipe we sent to you, and maybe you prepared this food for yourself. Hopefully, maybe in the next semester or the summer semester, we will start to have a hybrid format again, so that we can invite you for lunch again. Yeah, to the team belongs, as you can see with our background, Dr. Tanja Becker, Zhou Hermeng, Maximilian Lendner, and Dao Zhiyu, our assistant, but she is in another meeting right now. Yeah, I mentioned the keywords already. And I would like to hand over to Hermeng now to introduce our speaker of today. Thanks for coming and joining us.
Thank you, Sigrun. Hi, I'm Hermeng. So please let me introduce Dr. Cheng to you. Dr. Cheng holds a PhD in agricultural economics from the HU Berlin, Humboldt University of Berlin. And he is working at the TALF. TALF means Leibniz Center for Agricultural Landscape Research. He's a postdoc in the working group on governance of ecosystem research in TALF. And his research focuses on payments for ecosystem services and digitalization support. Dr. Chen has participated in many EU horizontal and large-scale German national research projects, and currently he co-leads the Sino-German project called SinoPES of the Sino-German Center for Science Research, founded by DFG, Deutsche Forschungsgemeinschaft, and NSFC, National Natural Science Foundation of China. In Chinese, it is 国家自然科学基金. I guess most of the Chinese students know this. He also co-coordinates the agricultural systems of the future project, and this project uses progressive digitalization and new technologies to integrate ecosystem services and biodiversity into modern agricultural production and marketing. So dear Dr. Chen, we are very glad to have you here today. And we are very looking forward to your presentation and the discussion afterwards. Thank you in advance, and the stage is yours.
Yes, thank you very much, Hermeng, for this very nice introduction. So now I will start to share my screen. Do you see the screen now in full screen?
Yes, everything is fine.
Okay, perfect. So the title of my presentation is about aligning land use and transforming agriculture to address the twin crises of biodiversity loss and climate change. I will pick up some policy and practice in Germany and China. So He Mengzhou has already nicely introduced me. So I work in the Leibniz Center for Agricultural Landscape Research. It's one of the more than 60 Leibniz Institute in Germany, and we are located in east side of Berlin, around 40-50 kilometers. So there's a train directly can bring us from Berlin Ostkreuz to Muschenberg, very close to Taff. And I did my PhD in the Humboldt University, and before I did my bachelor and master in China. So all of my research career has a strong have a strong focus on agricultural and also ecosystem services, and recently about digitalization. But for today, I think my talk will be the intersection between climate change and biodiversity loss, and also our needs for food, fiber, that means agriculture. So here I want to first show my favorite cartoon of describing the crisis of our time. And so there's like a city on the hill of the mountain saying, oh, just be sure you wash your hand and wearing a mask and we are all fine. Because we are against the pandemic, our crisis starting 3 years ago. And there's also the recession afterwards. But of course, scientists, they are making their voice very loud about climate change, but not really picking up the idea by many politicians. But I want to highlight actually there's even a bigger crisis than climate change crisis, that is the biodiversity collapse, which has not always been under the spotlight. And I think biodiversity loss, why I frame it as even a bigger crisis than the climate crisis, because human and history had made a tremendous loss of biodiversity. So there's this very famous curve called bending the curve of territory biodiversity loss. So this is illustration based on a Nature article. I think it's from. I can hear somebody's talking.
Sorry, hi Xin. Sorry, excuse me. Hi Xin, must be. Wait a moment.
Anja, du kannst, glaube ich, auch.
I know. I did it already.
Okay, sorry for that.
Okay, no problem. I cannot see you because I'm in full screen, but I can hear somebody's talking. So at least people are get into the topic of biodiversity loss. So from this curve, I think many of you, if you are familiar with a climate curve, you always know this trajectory of emission reduction, and this biodiversity curve is also similar, that you can see from 2010. The decline is still continue, and scientists hope to bend the curve before 2035, and after 2050 start to get biodiversity positive, and after nearly a decade from 2010 we should achieve increasing biodiversity in the next century. But to achieve this, to bend the curve of territory biodiversity loss, there are many actions should be done. And of course, similarly, like the climate target, we also have biodiversity target. So the famous climate target is from the Paris Agreement, that by 2050 we should achieve less than 1.5 degree of temperature increase, or ideally less than 1.5, and at minimum 2.5. And for biodiversity, we have the very famous Aichi target, which was agreed in 2010, and line the strategic plan for 10 years until 2020, and there are 20 targets of the biodiversity target, which can be split up even to 30 sub-targets. But sadly, like the climate target or like the sustainable development target from the UN, it's very easy to have all those targets, to have all those ambitions planned, but very difficult to implement them. So there's a report from UN very recently shows that only 6 of the Aichi target has been partially achieved, including protected area and invasive species. But not single of them have been fully achieved. And good news is that 44% of biodiversity areas are under protection, a strong increase of 29% comparing to 20 years ago. But still, the biodiversity is in decline, and we have not yet bent the curve. So this is, again, another sad story like the climate change curve, that we now need a strong actions, and we need a transformation pathway. So while I talk about issue of biodiversity loss in our climate China launch, climate launch China. So this, I suppose this is a venue for talk about climate change and adaptation, and what other practice have been seen in China, or what we can learn or promote in China, because according to IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, so I think this is the most official scientifically based organization on climate change. And another organization is a counterpart of IPCC for biodiversity and ecosystem services. That is this Intergovernmental Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services. You see they have very similar name. So both are very strong in their domain, and they made a conclusion very recently that limiting global warming to ensure a habitat, climate, and protecting biodiversity, they are mutually supporting goals, and their achievement is essential for sustainability and equitable providing benefits to people. So climate and biodiversity protection, they should go hand in hand. And the reason why we have to do it is for the interest of ourselves, that is for humankind. So here I pick up some results from the IPCC, IPBES joint report that why biodiversity and climate change, they are tightly intertwined, because many of those indirect and direct driver for these two crises, they are very much overlapped. So for the indirect drivers include economic driver, human demographic driver, technology driver, governance, they are basically the same. But for direct driver, for the biodiversity decline, we have here the invasive species, distinction of biodiversity, and pollution, and land and sea use change. And this pollution and land use, sea use change, they are just basically the same direct driver for climate change and biodiversity decline. And both crises are strong, are a very huge risk for the quality of human life. So here I want to focus on this red box of land use change, for example, deforestation, conversion for agricultural, livestock production, and plus agriculture, because this is one of the main driver for both crises of biodiversity decline and climate change. Again, from IPCC, IPBES report, and here can show how to integrate climate and the biodiversity aspect. So this is a very nice diagram. Probably you cannot see the text, but I want to highlight that. I don't know if you can see my mouse. So here is how the climate action can make positive or negative effects on biodiversity actions. So for climate action, here I want to highlight that for most of the action in ecosystem services and in food, they have positive aspect for biodiversity. But for energy, especially for hydropower and bioenergy like biogas. They have negative effects on biodiversity. And other way around, we can see here, these are the effects of actions on biodiversity protection for climate change, and most of them are in blue. That means they are primarily positive. So here is again the box I want to highlight, that for climate change, having biogas, bioenergy, or biomass energy or hydropower, we have to be careful, because it might help for climate change, but it might damage biodiversity. But in total, we can see there's a strong synergies between these two domains, that protecting biodiversity is in fact protecting our climate. And what we can do for the climate adaptation measures. So here again, from the IPCC, IPBES report, there are few sectors we can work on, including forest, agricultural, river, coast, tropical, coral reef, and also cities. And I want to here focus on forest and agricultural, because my core topic of today is land use and agricultural. So for these two domains, here they color-coded the different action. Like here, the background color in green, they are the nature-based solution. And in yellow, they are the institutional or social adaptation. And in gray, they are the technique adaptation. So there are lots of nature-based solution can happen. And some of them, they have biodiversity positive effects. Some of them have biodiversity negative effects. And obviously, most of the nature-based solution, they have biodiversity positive effects, and those technique solutions, and very often they have a red color in font, means they have biodiversity negative effects. Like for example, to have genetically modified tree, like as a technique solution for forest, or here increasing irrigation efficiency, which is very common for agricultural, and here irrigation capacity, another engineered solution for water. But both of those technique solutions, they have negative effects on biodiversity. So what are the key strategies we can do for both crises? And here there's a very nice publication from Gamescom from 2017 from the PNAS, showed some nature-based or area-based mitigation measures for climate. And in the first sector is forest, second sector is agriculture and grassland, and the third sector is wetland. I want you to look at here the dark gray color coding of the columns. Not only look at the light column, because for reforestation it looks like the potential very high, but they are not cost effective, and they are not low cost solutions. So looking at those low cost solutions here, about avoid forest conversion, and very strong here in nitrogen management, in tree for cropland, which means having some landscape elements in agricultural, and also about animal production, and here especially for peat restoration, for peatlands. So here I want to summarize a few key strategies, including first one, stop deforestation and forest degradation. And secondly, boosting climate and biodiversity friendly agriculture and forestry. So it's a 2/, like both climate and biodiversity. And the third one is to restore non-forest carbon-rich ecosystem services like peatlands, mangrove, and wetlands. And because traditionally there are lots of actions and policy or practice about forests. I think in both countries of Germany and in China, people have a thing about forests. People love trees. People love to see more trees. But just having tree is not the single solution, because I will talk about this issue later on. And some other ecosystem services like grassland or wetlands, they might have even better, not better, but they will have even diverse biodiversity effects. And that's why we have to be careful of too much emphasis on trees and forests. Okay, now I want to give you some numbers about how severe are the both crises. So here again, for the biodiversity crisis, according to IPBES, there's 1 million animal and plant species are considered in danger, especially for lots of birds and mammal. And here for climate change, I think many people are very often overlooked or neglect agricultural and land use sector. But here, this number is very impressive, that 22% of greenhouse gas emission are actually coming from agricultural, forestry, and other land use. This is the IPCC report from 2022. So this is a very recent estimation. Even before, I think the IPCC report in 2018 or 16, the number is even higher. I think it was 24%. So agricultural must also adapt better, because the yields of agricultural is increasingly threatened by increasing weather extremes such as heat, drought, flooding, and rising temperature and ozone level. And I want to here compare another 2 sectors, that is transport and the buildings, which also get lots of attention from scientists, politicians, and the general public. For the transport section, the emission is 15%, so 7% lower than agricultural and land use. And for building, which is getting lots of attention, it's not only, but 6% of total emission. So imagine there are tons of money being invested for transport and green buildings, but people, they just close one eye for what is very obvious, that is agricultural and land use. And sometimes I feel very interesting that people are getting very interesting about electronical vehicle or Tesla or something also in China. For transport, for innovative transport, but there's lots of things we can do, like not only government, but we as consumer, we can do every day. We are making decisions every day for the emission and biodiversity on agricultural and other land use.
Dr. Cheng, may I ask a question? Here is Sigrun speaking.
Yes, please.
Yeah. Can you give an example of, I'm really shocked by this number, 20% of global greenhouse gas goes on agriculture, forestry, and other land use. What is producing that much of greenhouse gas in agriculture?
Yes. Okay. Yes. So I'm also surprised, because I think many scientists here now in this Zoom room, I think you work with the topic of climate change. So if you are surprised by how important is agricultural and land use, so I think there is something we have to clarify. So for agricultural, the biggest emission is from methane from livestock production. So like beef, like a cow, or beef production, they are for those livestocking, and there are lots of methane and is emitted, and methane is many times stronger than CO2 in the long term. And for other agricultural production, like rice production, like meadow petal rice, this is also very strong for agricultural emission. And also for cropland, because soil can store tons, like medium tons of CO2. When you do tillage, like you put soil upside down, you also emit carbon to the atmosphere. And for forestry, here is because of deforestation, like now in the Amazon forest and also in Indonesia, many forests has been cut down for like palm oil production or for livestock production. And other land use here include, for example, peatlands. So in Europe, there's a strong concentration of peatlands. In Germany, I think there's more than 5%, but in Finland, there are more than 30%. In the Netherlands, also very huge amount of peatland. And peat stored, and peat is another topic I will touch upon later on. peat stored, peat is only, I think, 3% of all the territory surface, but peat store like 30% of carbon. And peat stored even more carbon than forest in total. So there's large of carbon from agricultural and land use, and there is a strong potential to mitigate those effects, especially to combine with biodiversity effects. So there are strong synergies for both domains. But again, I think this has not get enough attention from not only scientific community, but also politicians and the general publics.
Thank you. Thanks.
Yes. Good. I will now continue. But for agriculture and land use, I think there are even more problems than just talking about biodiversity loss and climate change. There's also other ecosystem services to be considered. Like here, the result shows that there is 12 million hectares of land. They are lost annually through degradation. So we are having a strong problem of a global problem of land degradation. And very important, we have to be aware that the global population is still growing. I think just 2 weeks ago, the world is reaching 5 million of people. And according to UN Popular Prospect from 2022, very recent result, the world will also reach 9.7 billion by 2050. To feed an increasing population, we need more food, more fiber, more biomass. So the food demand will be 50 to 60 higher than 2050. So I think for agriculture and land use, we have a problem of biodiversity decline, climate change, global market, economic growth. They all have trade-off effects on agriculture and other land use. And nicely, there is also some good news. So we are now also having some global efforts on the both crises. So the first one is the biodiversity, the COP15 should happen last year in Kunming, China, but this year moved to Montreal in Canada. And in COP15, we will discuss, not we, but the politician and the scientists will discuss the post-2020 global biodiversity framework on biodiversity since the adoption of Aichi targets in 2010. So Aichi targets, like the plan for 2010 to 2020, due to the pandemic, the COP15 did not take place, and this year in Canada is very important. Now all eyes are on what decision they can make. Hopefully they can achieve a better agreement, they can achieve something than the COP27. So here the COP27, which was happened, I think also just last month in Egypt. And I pick up one line from their report that from COP27, they said protecting biodiversity is protecting the Paris Agreement. But from my personal opinion, I think COP27 is still disappointed. It's disappointed like COP26, COP25, and the Loss and Damage Foundation is agreed, but there is no detailed plan or any obligation or also financial plan. And here, now I move to what happened in China, and China's position in biodiversity and climate change is very strong. So China wants to be seen as an international leader in environmental efforts and the architect of ecological civilization. I think probably many of you already know the ambition of China. And China's climate pledge is to reach carbon neutrality by 2060. And regarding biodiversity efforts, China has put lots of investment on forest and grassland. So the forest resource has a growth from only 0.6% in 1949 to almost 23% in 2019. So there's a figure from NASA observation. So here there's a line showing the global average, what happened in the last 10 years of the greening, like the green leaves, especially for forest and grassland. And here you can see for the last 10 years, China has increased more than 10%, followed by India, and the EU is less than 5%, and USA is a little bit more than 2%, and for Brazil is even less than global average. So we can see China is really taking the leadership of all the green efforts on land-based activities. But there are also lots of risks and there are lots of threats, especially here for forest, because the significant increase of forest in China took a cost of a monopoly of forest. It means most of the forests have been planted by only a few number of species. So this is like the monoculture of agriculture, which is very low resistant to pest disease and also to climate change. And the other thing, there's also the status of endangered species has even been exaggerated. And what are the policies on land use and agriculture in Germany and China? So here I show the basic facts that in Germany, more than 27 land are underprotected, and in China, from the data 2 years ago, it's more than 18%. But here the 18% is really already a very big effort. I will touch upon this again, considering the very short amount of time. And here I divided their policies into different sectors. So here for like biodiversity in the EU, we have biodiversity, biodiversity strategy, habitat directive, Natura 2000. In China, there's a lot, including the national biodiversity strategy, key ecological function area, national park. And for forest in the EU, there's also forest strategy. In China, there's a large amount of forest program. And for grassland, China, there's also grassland ecological protection policy. For agricultural, here there are also a lot from the EU, common agricultural policy, farm to fork strategy. But for agricultural, China, there's a very little bit policy. So I think I have only half hour, right?
You have between 30 minutes and 40 minutes time.
40 minutes. So now I still have 12 minutes. Okay, all right. So here for some examples, I will go one side about Germany and another side about China. I will go very quick about Germany because I think today the focus is about China. But I use Germany just as a comparison for reference. So there are lots of governmental schemes. Here I pick one of the most important instruments, that is Natura 2000. Maybe some of you have already saw this logo somewhere, because if you walk around in the countryside, very often you will see this Natura 2000 logo, or in Germany you can also see Naturschutzgebiet, nature protection area, or Landschaftsschutzgebiet, landscape protection area. There is also Wasserschutzgebiet, water protection area. So again, 18% of land in the EU, they are under strong protection, and they are mandatory participate because most of the land, they are also private lands. And another scheme is very important for Germany and the EU is the common agricultural policy in the agricultural sector. Especially here, I want to mention the agri-environmental climate schemes, which is the second pillar of the CAP. It has been applied to 26.3% of utilized agricultural land. So farmers, they can also get the subsidy for adapting some environmental climate practice. For example, to have less fertilizer, to have less pesticide, or to have a flower strip, a grassland strip, hedgerow, landscape elements, or to put some land aside. So this is again to provide the different ecosystem services or a more diversified use of agricultural land. So this diversified use is in country of this monoculture use of agricultural field. Now I want to move to China. So the ecological policy development in China has been very rapid. I want to mention in 2008, this is the land tenure reform, because historically in China, most of the land, they belong to the country or belongs to the community, the rural community. And since the land reform, in reality, farmers and forest owners, they have the user right of their land. And here there are also a few other policy, including the natural reserve policy, and from 2014, the flagship policy of ecological conservation red line, which aim to protect more than 25% of China territory. And from 2015, there's China's first ever national park, including 10 across the country, covering only not only but 2.3% of the total land area. So here you can see the hierarchy: nature reserve 15.7%, ecological conservation red line aim to have 25, but this is still the aim, and national park 2.3%. So national park has the highest protection. And there's a very nice figure showing the increase of the nature reserve in China. And I want to highlight that nature reserve in China is also very different to the nature reserve in Germany or in Europe, because in China it has been divided into the core zone, buffer zone, and experiment zone, which has a very different rule to have economical production, like to having tourism or to plant agricultural crop. But in Europe, most of the natural reserve, you still can do agricultural production. So there's a strong differences between the human activities within the nature reserve. So here there's a distribution of the national park in China. There's now 10, and I imagine more will come. And I will skip the Giant Panda National Park. And now another sector about forest. So there's also, as I mentioned early on, the forest has been steadily increased for the last 30 years. And there are lots of programs about forest, including the Forest Eco-Efficiency Compensation Program, Natural Forest Protection Program, and the Sloping Land Conversion Program. I will now pick only the Sloping Land Conversion Program. So it has been initiated in 1990. It is again the world's largest reforestation program, involving 4.1 million of households, 25 provinces, 13.26 million hectares of land. So the box, the information in the green box is just showing you how magnificent, how big, how huge the program is. And the idea is to reforest. So in 1960s, many of the land on the steep slope has been converted to cropland to produce food. And following a very severe flood in 1990s, government made program to retire those land on steep slope and convert them back to forest. And in this process, there's also giving election right to the rural community and proper right confirmation. The land tenure reform happened during the process. And now I want to have a reflection on those governmental schemes. So in Germany, 52 of the protected area, they are mostly for forest ecosystem services. So here in this diagram, you can show in Germany, the strong focus is on forest, but agricultural, here the agro ecosystem services, here the light green, is also more than 40%. So at both agricultural, including grassland and the cropland, they are a strong pillar of biodiversity. conservation, and they also have a strong effects on climate change, especially grassland services, a grassland system. And in China, we can see there's a strong focus of protected area on forests and other wetlands. But farmland biodiversity has not been given enough attention, and most of the governmental schemes, they are heavily shaped by state-led model of environmental governance. So there's also a recent paper calling for more action on agro biodiversity in China. Now I want to move to non-governmental sectors. So what are the practice and what are the social innovations in Germany? I want to introduce two schemes. They are the private conservation schemes. One is called More Futures, is conserving peatlands. So early on I said peat is a strong source of greenhouse gas emission, and another one is called Agora Natura. It's an online marketplace for biodiversity and ecosystem services. And I'm part of the team member of Agora Natura. You can also scan the QR code to get into the website, where you can buy ecosystem services or biodiversity certificate, which is similar like the carbon certificate. But so this is the More Future schemes about. So here is the diagram showing the ecological process or the gas fluxes of peat soil, organic soil, because of the drainage. Lots of emission they came out, and after rewetting, peat become again the carbon can absorb, can sequestrate carbon and store in the soil. And in More Future, you can buy a carbon certificate like this. And those are the achievement in For Future. You can see, I think until now, most of the projects, they have already been sold out. And this is the Agora Natura platform. Here you can also buy the different anchor boards, the different offer for nature conservation. Here there's even a collection with peatland conservation. Here you can see there are different services, including biodiversity, including climate protection, water protection, and cultural experience. And this is a diagram showing the concept of Agora Natura. And again, here you can get a certificate. Now I want to move back again to China. So what are the non-governmental schemes in China? Here I highlight, so this is the environmental ministry in China. And he recently gave a talk about action for nature and people, and what are the engagement of non-state actors. And there's also a World Economic Forum report on how business can be involved toward a nature positive economy. And here I use one example of the Alibaba Group, because it is one of the largest corporation in China, and they are also doing their social responsibility report, and they have a chapter for biodiversity and climate mitigation. I want to showcase one program from the Alibaba Group that is called Ant Forest. I think most of the participants from China, they should or they might use the Alipay software. So it's the Chinese version of PayPal, very popular. And within the Alipay, there's a built-in app called Ant Forest. In this Ant Forest, you can collect those green energies and use the green energy to plant trees to fight for desertification. And you can even donate your green energy for some protected area, like here for the crane and here for the monkey. And again, this is the diagram of showing how the concept works. So as the user of Alipay and support by the Alibaba Group, you give your green points to the Ant Forest app, and the Ant Forest app, they give real money to environmental NGO, and they work with farmers to protect here the protected area, or also to plant small tree seeds in the desertification area, and they feed the result back to the Ant Forest app, and the user, they get the information from the Alipay software. And the whole process is supervised and certificated by the Beijing Environment Exchange and the Nature Conservancy, the American environmental NGO. And here I'm showing you a certificate I get from Ant Forest. But I want to remind you that it's not so easy to find the synergies within biodiversity and climate change. So this is a very, very good scientific publication from the team of Ouyang Zhiyun from the Chinese Academy of Science, published in PNAS from 2017, about the spatial distribution of different ecosystem services. So here we can see water, soil, carbon, and biodiversity. So here, if we have a close comparison between biodiversity and carbon sequestration, they are not necessarily overlaps, because many of the carbon sequestrations, they need to happen also on grassland and cropland and also wetland. But at the moment, most of the nature reserve in China, they are still about on the wideness, like especially here in the east side of China, not in the the metro, close to the metropolitan area or close to the urban area. So here come to my conclusion, but I rather call it my reflection, that climate adaptation strategy, first one, can backfire against biodiversity, like planting monoculture and non-native trees. This has really been observed in the last few years in Germany. Many trees have been dead, and because of disease, because of the drought, because of those trees has been intensively planted, I think during the 1960s. By monocultural planting, not a native or climate-resistant species. And China is making a new institutional setting to support ecosystem services governance, made great efforts on forest, grassland, and protected area. But there's a need for farmland biodiversity strategy to cope the twin crisis of climate change, of biodiversity loss. And last but not the least, I want to highlight that there is a strong business opportunity in China toward nature positive economy. Okay, that would be all of my presentation. Thank you very much. I think Hemong had introduced that. I work in also several different projects. Here, the first one is the darkest project about digitalization and for a diversified agricultural, and second one is Agua-Natura, the online platform for ecosystem services certificate. I'm also co-coordinate the Sinopass project about different policy instrument for ecosystem services governance. Thank you.
Thank you, Cheng. Thank you for the nice presentation.
Thank you very much. A big round of applause for you digitally and like this. Thank you very, very much. It was very, it was a little shocking with all these numbers and the two crises you described, but it gave hope as well, because your work is very, very important, and there is a lot of action going on. There's a lot of action needed still in future times, but we can all do a little about it and help with all the initiatives, and this is a good sign as well. We are like 32 participants here, and I would like to ask you now that we can start the Q&A session. I think the recording will be stopped soon, and then we can start.